All right. I think we're live.
I think we're live. I'm checking.
Well, we're pros at this.
Yeah, we are. We're doing such a great job.
Yeah.
Watch out, Mike Winger. We're coming for you, buddy.
Yeah, it's showing we're live.
Sweet. Well, good evening, dear friends. We are together, STR Book Club, where we're studying the book Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. This is the 10th anniversary edition that we'll be going through. Last week was our first session. We covered chapters 1 to 3. And tonight, God willing, we're going to get through chapters 4, 5, and 6. Going to have a lot of fun. In this study, we're not going to be reading the book. We're hoping that you guys have already read through those chapters. And we're not going to be really discussing, we're not going to be reviewing concepts in the book necessarily, but we want to talk about some of the things that we think are helpful. We're going to maybe bring in some stories of how we've used some of these tactics. It's just going to be a fun discussion where we go through the likes and maybe some dislikes, maybe some things that we don't like, and which I'm sure are going to be, few and far between since
tons of dislikes.
Oh man, all kinds of problems with this material.
You guys tell me what you think, but and I'm not just saying this. This book, I put a talk together on tactics before I ever came to work at Standard Reason, because it had changed the way I do evangelism and apologetics. Is that true for you guys?
Alan?
Well, no, because I was working at Standard Reason for the last 16 years. So
now, no, but Greg.
Oh, okay, Mr. Seniority.
Okay, but Greg has been talking.
Did I just pull rank?
You did.
Hasn't changed my life at all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it changed my life, but I mean, the book, I mean, it's a 10th anniversary edition, so it came out 10 years ago. So, yeah, but I mean, of course, he was teaching on the material beforehand, and I was teaching on it too. So, I mean, no, your point is valid, even for me. It's been revolutionary, not just in my own life, but in terms of what I've been teaching other people and how it's changed them. Changed them as well. So
yeah. Now, John, did this book play a role? We don't have time to talk about your conversion or anything like that in this session. But when you were an atheist, did this book? I mean, did you know about the book, or when you became a Christian, did you discover the book? How did that play out?
Yeah, I became a Christian before the first edition came out, but I used to listen to Greg on the radio. He used to have like his radio show used to be 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And I'd listen to him. I'd listen to J. Warner Wallace when he was Please Convince Me. Mm-hmm. And I used to listen to Frank Pastore, who was a radio personality on KKLA here. He died in a motorcycle accident many years ago now. But I used to listen to them, and I remember Greg using some of these tactics with people he just talked to. And it didn't seem, the thing that always stuck out to me, and after I read the book for the first time, I realized what he was doing, but it never seemed contrived, or it didn't seem like it was a plan. It was just, he was just having conversations with people. Yeah. And then when I read this book, I don't know if I said it last time, when I read this many years ago, I actually ended up buying a copy of this for every single person in our church's high school group. Mm-hmm. So Rihanna and I purchased probably 35 copies and handed them out because the information I thought was so good.
Yeah,
it was worth everybody's time.
Sweet. And we're going to get into the meat of the book, I think. I mean, this is the chapters 4 and 5 especially are.
I just have one question.
Yeah, hit me with it.
Who in the world is Columbo?
Yeah,
you're not that young, John. Don't even try.
Who in the world is Columbo?
Well,
you saw those episodes, like the first runs of them. Come on.
Yeah.
I was a Cheers guy. I was Cheers and MASH.
Yeah. Well, yeah, MASH goes back a ways too.
Yeah.
By the way, John, I noticed what shirt you're wearing.
Oh, no way, twinsies.
And we didn't even plan that.
Twinning.
Have you been to that conference?
I was thinking about it. Somebody brought it home for me.
I bet.
I'm not really into that apologetics stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like arguing with people.
We can tell.
The Bible says not to argue. Don't be quarrelsome is what the Bible says.
That's right.
And if anyone doesn't realize that John's being sarcastic, they need to, go through our last session because we talked about that exact kind of argument. And so, but just before we get into it, we should probably mention, we realize it is Easter and there's going to be a lot of people doing family stuff and maybe church services going on, night services, that kind of thing. And so, but if you're tuning in, we want to hear from you. And so I see on the chat, we have Andrew is in there. And so if there's others and they're commenting, that's great. We want to hear from you. If you have questions, then feel free to throw them at us and we'll keep an eye on it and bring you in when we can. Cool.
Oh, so, Alan Shlemon's here.
Yeah. He's I see him in the chat.
Wow. I wish I could meet him someday.
You'd be blessed.
I heard he's famous.
Yeah.
So, you guys ready to get into chapter 4?
I don't know. Let's wait about another 30 minutes and then we'll get into it. How about that?
And then do it?
Yeah.
That's just in time for me to go dinner.
Put on. Yeah, that's I got all night. It's 9:00 here and kids are in bed. And so you guys are the ones who got dinner coming up, right?
That's true. Yeah. My family's waiting for me.
So we better get into it.
I'm here.
So chapter 4.
All right, chapter 4.
This is where we get into the game plan. We talked a little bit about the game plan last week. Chapter 3 kind of introduced it. It's going to be a question game plan. I think we even introduced who Columbo is. And we were joking about this before the book. I didn't know who Columbo was. I never seen a single episode. No.
And never even heard of it?
Never even heard of it. And now maybe that's because I'm here in Canada and, we don't have cable or something. And
TV hasn't been invented in Canada yet.
So once we get TV, which I heard it's cool. No, I don't know why. Growing up, we never watched Columbo and I hadn't even heard of it. So I was very curious about, this guy. And so now, of course, I've seen a few episodes. And of course, his thing is to ask questions, to go on the offensive in an inoffensive way, and by carefully selecting questions that kind of productively move the conversation along. And of course, chapter 4 is all about, if you read it, it's about gathering information. Okay, and so I wanted to ask you guys again. We're not necessarily going to review all the content in there. That would take way too long to do all that. But obviously there's some key insights in this chapter, at least for me. There's some key insights that kind of were game changing, talks about it being a game plan. They really are. I mean, these are the kind of the skills in here, the tactics in here, the main tactic, literally changed the way I do evangelism and do apologetics. And so, I don't know. Let's throw it at you guys. Maybe we can start with Alan and see, is there anything in there you want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, there would be a lot. I mean, I think one of the things that probably stood out to me the most is the importance of this first question. What do you mean by that? Not just giving you information and telling you what another person believes, but the reason why I think that's important is because it can help us as Christians from looking foolish. And the classic example, and Greg mentioned, I don't know if he even mentioned this in the chapter. I'm trying to remember because I read it a few days ago. But when someone claims that evolution is a well-proven fact, for example, okay, if you don't ask the question, what do you mean by evolution? It can make you look very foolish because just as a review, there's at least 3 different definitions of evolution, right? There's change over time. Yeah. There's the special theory of evolution or microevolution. And there's the general theory of evolution or macroevolution, right? So, of course, we all believe in change over time, right? So if you ask a person, well, what do you mean by evolution? And they tell you change over time. Well, of course you would agree to that. Mm-hmm. If you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, they gave examples of microevolution, like bacteria developing a resistance to antibiotics, or, you know, some of the small changes that take place within a species so that a species can adapt to their environment. Well, again, we Christians believe in that as well. Yeah. And so if they offered explanation or examples of microevolution, then you'd still say, yeah, I totally agree with that. But then if they offer examples of macroevolution, like, you know, a wolf-like creature evolving into a whale or a dolphin or something like that, well, then, of course, we'd have a disagreement with that, right? And so notice 2 out of the 3 definitions of evolution that they might offer, when you ask them, what do you mean by that? We could wholeheartedly agree to, okay? And so this is why if someone says to you, well, evolution is a well-proven fact, and you don't ask the Columbo question, but instead you give your knee-jerk response by saying, oh, that's ridiculous. Evolution is not a well-proven fact. But in their mind, they're thinking of a microevolutionary example or change over time. Then they're going to think that you as a Christian are out to lunch. It's like, you don't even believe in this commonsensical, well-proven concept, you know? And so this is why it's not just that it gives you information, asking what do you mean by that, but it'll actually help you to make sense of what their view is, so you know, well, do I actually disagree with them or not? Because maybe you don't, you know? Yeah. So I mean, this is such an essential chapter, you know, and I think along with chapter 5 as well. But it's examples like that I think help us to prevent ourselves from looking foolish in situations where we don't need to.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, totally. Just, I mean, along those same lines, you know, getting clarity so you can just understand where they're coming from. I typically, when I'm talking with an atheist, will ask them, what do you mean by God?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because oftentimes I say this in my talk on God, when I talk about God's existence, the God usually that they don't believe in is a God I don't believe in either. I mean, just the concept of God that they have in their mind is typically not the God I have in my mind. And so when they say they don't believe in God, oftentimes I can stand right next to them, shoulder to shoulder. I don't believe in that God either. You know, this kind of idea. So you're right on, you know, what do you mean by that question gets that clarity, so you can know whether there is even a disagreement to begin with. Right.
Yeah.
Good job, Alan. You got it right.
Yeah. You nailed it, man. You nailed
Gold star.
I copied your notes, John. That's why
I knew what I could tell. Yeah. No, what you guys are saying, I think, is really important. And for me, this first question, I wrote in this margin here, it narrows the conversation down.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in conversations, especially with a non-believer, an atheist, a skeptic, an agnostic, and I used to be like this too, and it wasn't intentional at all. I wasn't trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink at somebody, but inevitably that's what I'd kind of do. But this first question, I think, really helps you define the conversation, narrow it, and stay on task. While also in the book, it says you're drawing the person out and showing a genuine interest. Now, this is where I think it's really important to talk about a tactic not being, I mean, it's a game plan, but it's not contrived. It's not something like you don't want to use this in a way that is annoying. You know, I'm definitely guilty of that. When I first learned this, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what do you mean by that? Oh, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? You know, and like people were just like, you know what? I've answered 20 questions in a row. I don't want to talk to you anymore. So it's an important, I think, step right at the forefront of the conversation to say that this is an opportunity for us to engage an image bearer with the hopes, at least me personally, my hope is to get on the topic of a spiritual nature so that I can tell them about the love of Jesus. And that's what leads my motivation when I'm using this tactic, but it's showing a sincere interest in that person and their ideas. I really want to know what this person believes because like what you said, Tim, I mean, how often I used to, I used to use the words that we all hear, the sky daddy, how can you believe in that sky daddy that throws lightning bolts down from the sky, supposedly on the people he loves? It's like, whoa, I don't believe that either. I don't believe in the sky daddy. So now we can cross that one off the list. Let's talk about the God of the Bible now. But these are all things. And this is a great question to just get into that mode with somebody. Have them kind of relax. They're used to oftentimes those evangelists. I remember when I first learned this stuff, and I was a fairly new Christian. Rihanna and I had driven up to San Francisco for our wedding anniversary, and we were stuck in traffic because it was Christmas time, and they're having the tree lighting that night right outside our hotel. Yeah. So like we had to circle our hotel, and on one corner there were just those jerks for Jesus, the people, the nasty signs that they hold up against homosexuals, and it was just so disparaging. And I remember hopping out of the car with my Bible, my New Believer's Bible, because I was on fire for Jesus. Right. And I approached them and I started asking my Christian counterpart these questions. Well, what do you mean God hates this person? Like, what do you mean he hates this person? Did his son go to the cross for this person or not? And when his son went to the cross for this person, was it out of hate? And it was just great to be able to use these types of tactics, even on Christians, to help them think more deeply about their worldview. That's all I got for the whole night, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can go ahead and sign off, and I'll take it from here. Okay.
Yeah.
Pressure's off.
We'll see you later.
Yikes.
No, that's good, John.
Easter in Canada too.
What's that? No. Easter's pagan. So we don't. No.
It's Resurrection Sunday.
Yeah. There you go. So let me add a couple things. For me, and I totally agree with what you guys said, but at even a more basic level, Columbo 1, the first Columbo step, asking, what do you mean by that? To me, just to know that there was a first step, someone says something, and this happens all the time, man. You're at work. I know I was discovering Stand to Reason and tactics when I was in university. And when I went to teachers college, I went to a secular school, and my classmates, we're all very good friends, but it was a hostile environment, right? And
secular school.
Some of my best friends in school there were Muslim and Jewish and atheist, and like not just, I don't know what I believe, but like overtly atheist. I think I mentioned this last week. Like making DVDs of Zeitgeist movie and handing it out. And those who don't know the Zeitgeist movie, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I want to know where that guy is now.
Yeah.
Do you think he's still handing out copies of Zeitgeist?
Well, I don't know. If Ryan Kitchen, if you're listening, I don't know.
I love that. He
was a great guy, and we've haven't been in contact much since then. That was 2008. So it was a while ago. But just to know that I had a first step, because oftentimes someone says something and the first thing that happens is your heart starts going a mile a minute, right? And it's like, I don't know what to say. Where do I go? And I used to think it was my job to be the Bible answer man, and people in the chat, they'll know what I'm talking about. If you got to go into defensive mode. So someone says there is no God. I have to say, oh yes, there is. And here are the reasons. And you go through the cosmological, teleological, moral. And I found myself, preaching sermons nobody wanted to hear, and right. Answering questions that frankly nobody was asking. Right. And so to me, there was this, the weight was off my shoulders. Now I was able just to, with a question, again, Greg talks about this, questions are friendly, and they're not, you don't have to defend anything. And to me, that was like bonus, right? Because I'm just learning. 2008, I'm still kind of young into this apologetic stuff, just a couple years in. And so I didn't know much, but we would have the best discussions. And oftentimes it was just me asking the question, what do you mean by that? And how'd you come to that conclusion? And it would just like progress and progress and progress. And, Greg makes the comment that many times people don't even know what they believe. And they
Right.
don't know why we're going to get to that part, why they believe it.
The Simon and Garfunkel response.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that.
Which again, I'm not, when I wasn't into Simon and Garfunkel either. So I'm reading Greg's book, like, who is this guy? Like, how old is he? Right. So that the whole 10-second window idea that he says, look at, someone says something, you got 10 seconds to say something before the mood, the topic changes or whatever. Right. And so you got to say something. And so just to have that question kind of in your back pocket, to me, that had so much value. I mean, it's so simple. In fact, when we give talks on this and you tell people, just ask them what they mean by that, I feel like I'm ripping them off, like I've come all this way, you flew me in, and I'm telling you the most basic thing, right? But it is a earth-shattering thing, at least it was for me. It was such a game changer. And it's totally changed, like I said, how I talk to people now and have these spiritual conversations. So that was, for me, that was a big one.
That's good.
Yeah. And I'm sure we have tons of stories from the field where we've put this kind of thing into practice. But it might be, do you guys think we should move on, or do you want to say any more about chapter 1?
Let me add one more point. And I want to speak to those people who maybe have read this and are still thinking like, I'm not sure I can do this, because a lot of the stories that we see Greg sharing about his interactions, what you're giving here is a sort of behind the scenes look at how Greg is thinking when he interacts with somebody. And what I want to point out, and this isn't so much pushback against what Greg is saying, because he often says, and I often say, even when I'm teaching on tactics, that you don't have to have a ton of knowledge in order to be able to use these tactics. And generally speaking, I think it's true. Yeah. But there's a lot of things that Greg says and a lot of confidence that he moves with that is based on the fact that he does have a certain amount of knowledge. So, for example,
brilliant.
It's brilliant. Yeah. So there's a lot of statements, like on page 74, where he's talking about this, like when somebody makes the challenge or offers the challenge, hey, it's wrong to politically force your views on other people, or you're violating the principle of church and state. And then the next thing Greg says is this: it's pretty easy to see the problem with this first point, And there's a whole bunch of other places where Greg says, oh yeah, and the problem with that is obvious, or I think
for him maybe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for him it is, right. And so then he uses his tactics to just sort of upend those particular challenges. Yeah. And I think a lot of people might see that and think, that wasn't really obvious to me, or I don't know if I'd have the confidence to then ask him all these Columbo questions, because maybe they have all kinds of great answers and I don't know how to deal with them, And I guess the point I want to make is, well, number one, if you're reading that and you're thinking that, I don't want you to be discouraged, because, well, I want to say this: there is a certain minimal level of knowledge that I think is important for us to have. Yeah. And although it's true that you can use these tactics without having any knowledge about a certain subject, man, if you have some knowledge, it'll help you to have the kind of confidence that Greg has. Okay. It'll help you to be able to traffic in those conversations with more vigor and confidence. And I guess, I mean, again, this isn't so much to push back against what Greg is saying here, but I think it means that we should spend our lives trying to build up our level of knowledge. And Greg talks about this at the beginning of the book, where he talks about the ambassador model and how we're all ambassadors for Christ. Yeah. And the 3 essential skills for being an ambassador are knowledge, wisdom, and character. This whole book is on the wisdom part of it. Okay. But remember, being an ambassador requires we do have a certain amount of knowledge. And I think when you read these tactics and you see Greg interacting and saying, oh, this is obvious, this is easy, It's because he does have a lot of knowledge, actually. And to the degree to which we can take time and study knowledge and make that a part of our life and spend a whole lifetime learning and educating ourselves about religion or about other religions or about morality, about politics, or whatever it might be, to the degree that we can do that, it'll help us to have the kind of confidence that Greg has, and to be able to move forward with a little bit more vigor than I think we might if we didn't have that knowledge.
Yeah.
So just
can I add something to that, Alan?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say that oftentimes the way that we gain knowledge is through experience. So when we're out there and we're doing these things, even though we don't have the knowledge, it's a way of gaining that knowledge. So I think the important thing is to go out with an understanding that you don't know everything. There's a lot to learn, but I'm going to go out there and put myself out there anyway. I mean, the amount of times me personally, I got beat up in conversations. And granted, it's a personality. I think Tim last time talked about, gardening. And did we talk about gardening, harvesting last time? And I tend to be more on the evangelistic side, harvesting side, I guess, even though I don't lead a ton of people to the Lord. But I like arguing, and I really like confrontation. But if you just put yourself out there, I find, for me at least, I learn so much from other people, especially people I disagree with. And oftentimes we as Christians, I feel like we feel very safe and comfortable in our Christian bubble because everybody agrees with us for the most part. And what I love about this tactic, the Columbo tactic, is it gives us a way that we can kind of break through that bubble a little bit. But I love what you just said. I actually wrote it down. Did you just say we should spend our lives building our amount of knowledge, or something to that effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should just have a lifelong pursuit of educating ourselves, and that'll help us to kind of amplify the capacity of these tactics, I think.
I love that. I'm going to make a meme of that. I'm going to use your beautiful face too.
If you put his face on it, it's not going to get shared.
Yeah, right.
I'm reading right now, and I don't want to take us too far off topic, so feel free just to tell me to be quiet. But I'm reading right now, Fahrenheit. What is it? 450, whatever. And I've never read that book. Have you guys read that?
No, I think my wife read it recently.
Dude, you guys got to pick it. You can read it. It'll take you a day or two. I'm almost done with it. And I picked it up, I think, 2 nights ago. And it's so good. And in it, one of the parts is that they distract people, like this magisterium that controls everything, by giving people a ton of facts, but keeping knowledge from them. So they know a ton of facts, but they don't have any knowledge, which I thought was really interesting. And it kind of relates to what's that?
Sounds like the internet.
Well, dude, it's totally like they have the parlor room, which is like this technological thing that distracts them from reality. And it's you guys should check it out. That should be the next book we do a book club on. But anyways, I love that what you just said, Alan, about there is a certain base of knowledge. There's a prerequisite that makes it more comfortable, at least, in conversing with people. But I'd urge people, especially with it being Easter season, people are expecting you right now to talk to them about your faith, about Jesus. Yeah. So just put yourself out there. What's the worst thing that happens?
Yeah. And just to go to your point, your initial point, Alan, you're talking about evolution, and you can't ask the question, what do you mean by evolution? Or I should say you wouldn't ask that question if you didn't realize up front that there are multiple definitions of evolution. Oh, yeah. Right? So
that's true.
It wouldn't even occur to you to ask, what do you mean by evolution? If you didn't have that sense, I guess, is what I'm thinking. So yeah, the knowledge component is something that Greg certainly has much of. And so I think when he says things like, obviously, this is easy to spot. I remember reading some of those questions just 2 days ago when I was reading these chapters and thinking, that's such a great question. I never would have asked that question. I wouldn't have come up with it. Yeah. Of course, he spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff. Yeah. Just to bring in some comments here. We had Philip here, really good point. It helps, talking about Columbo, helps slow down and listen. I think the listening part, I mean, obviously asking questions, right?
Yeah.
Is going to get us to listen. And that's the point. The point is to slow the whole conversation down now.
Yeah.
Understand and really listen to the answer. These questions, like John mentioned, they're not just contrived, they're not manipulation. We really want an answer to the question, right?
Yeah.
And he adds, keeps my emotions in check. And actually, that's a really good point too, because like I mentioned, as soon as someone says something you disagree with, often the heart starts going, the ears start burning. Those kind of feelings end up welling up, and questions are a good way to keep you in check. Greg says something similar. I think tactics help me to be a better at being quicker to listen and ask more questions, and slower to speak rather than immediately attempting to refute the claim or objection. And that's the way it should be. Ask the question first. Don't just try to, go for the jugular.
Yeah.
Again, is our knee-jerk reaction. It's in all of us, right? We all want to say, "Oh no, you didn't," and start attacking, and tactics takes a different approach. So really good comments. I'm just scrolling through to see if there was any others that I missed. That's good. All right, so you guys want to move on to the second Columbo number 2, chapter 5?
My wife's gonna stop pounding on the door soon.
Yeah. So, we'll be a little quicker with this. And to me, this is even more fundamental question. Reversing the burden of proof is the chapter title. So, Alan, we'll go around the circle again.
Sure.
So, something you liked.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I went back to look at the notes I had taken on this chapter, and because usually I'll underline things or whatever, and I didn't highlight hardly anything. And the reason is not because there was nothing in there worth it. It's because almost everything in there, I was like reading, I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Well, yes, duh. And everything in this chapter is stuff that I teach when I teach on tactics. And so it all was familiar to me. And it was all like, oh my gosh, this is all critical, like the whole darn thing. So, I think, if somebody really wanted to be like, okay, well, what's one of the most essential tactics? I would say it would be Columbo. And if you were to say, well, which of the Columbo tactics or which of the Columbo applications is perhaps one of the most important ones, I would say it's this one. It's reversing the burden of proof. It's asking the question, how did you come to that conclusion, and reversing the proof by doing so. This is a question that every Christian needs to adopt into their practice, into their vocabulary, and to say it out loud in a safe situation with their friends and family, so that it becomes more easier and more muscle memory when you have to say it in a more hostile situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the no more free rides thing, I think, is perhaps, there's so many takeaways, but that's the one I want to highlight right now, is the no more free rides, which is the mistake I think Christians make. Is that what you've highlighted too? Yep. And we didn't compare notes either, by the way.
Yeah.
But when I train, so a lot of my events, I'll train a group of students or adults, and then we'll go out into a public setting, like a downtown area, like downtown Portland, and then we'll do surveys where we ask people questions. And I'll see Christians make this mistake all the time. They give people a free ride, They'll be in a conversation with a non-Christian. The non-Christian will say, all religions are basically the same. And the Christian will not ask the Columbo question. Instead, they'll give a free ride. They'll be like, oh, no, they're not all the same, because in Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. And in Islam, Jesus is just a prophet. And in Judaism, he's neither the Son of God nor a prophet, so they can't be the same. And they'll just go on and on and on, trying to respond to this claim, this assertion, to this roof on the ground, to not an argument, but just a mere opinion, a mere assertion. And they're just doing all the work. And they're making their job of sharing their faith or evangelism 100 times harder than it needs to be. And so I have to call them out on it, because usually we'll do like a debrief after every encounter. And so anyways, I think if Christians just learned how to avoid giving people a free ride and learned the art of reversing the burden proof, it'll make the job or the task of evangelism or sharing their faith or having a religious conversation literally 100 times harder than it would be if they just continued to make this mistake. So to me, that was the biggest takeaway. And like, this chapter is so fundamental to the entire book, because it literally shifts, I think, the entire trajectory of the direction you're moving in when you're having a conversation. So,
Alan, you mentioned it's a roof on the ground. Can you? There may be some people that don't know what you meant by that.
Oh yeah, well, so Greg unpacks this idea that an argument is basically like a house, right? So a house has a roof and has walls, and the walls support the roof. And he says an argument is similar in the sense that an argument has to have a claim, which is your opinion or your view, but an argument isn't merely a claim or your opinion. It has to have reasons why your claim or your opinion is true, reasons or evidence. And so the roof is your claim, and the walls are your evidence or your reasons, okay? So if you have a house, you have your claim with the walls holding it up, the roof, and holding up the roof. Well, if you just hear someone offer their opinion, all they've done is offered a roof without walls, which would be a roof on the ground. And that's not a house. And so you shouldn't treat their statement or their claim as an argument, because all they've offered you is their opinion. They've offered you a roof on the ground. So what you want to do is ask them for the walls. Ask them for the reasons why their opinion is true. In other words, you're asking them to provide walls for their house, for their roof, So that's what I meant by that, But too often we interpret a roof on the ground as if it's a full-on house when it's not. And that's what Greg means by giving people a free ride. And this is a mistake I see all the time. Yeah. I've made the mistake, by the way, as well. So I'm not pointing my finger at anybody else. I mean, because we have this temptation, like you're saying, Tim, to be a Bible answer man or be like, God's bulldog. And like, anytime anyone makes any claim, we got to refute it. We don't. Yeah. Make them shoulder the burden of proof.
Yeah. All right, John, do you have anything to add to that?
You like said everything, Alan, that's in my notes, dude. I was going to say opinions aren't proof is something that, it was, the roof on the ground. I thought one of the fundamental concepts that we've got to understand and then come to recognize. And then also, once we recognize it, we have to figure out how to communicate that principle, that fact to the person we're talking to, because not everybody understands that.
Yeah.
A lot of people, especially today out there, when you're talking to somebody, people think their opinion is, this is an outflowing of, relativism, right? So they think their opinion is just as valid as anybody else's opinion. And you can just give your opinion, and that should just stand alone. And that's just not the way that it works. So actually, with this, when I'm practically speaking, when I'm out and about doing this type of thing, when I'm talking to my non-believing friends or family, I spend a fair amount of my time asking a lot of questions, yes, but also trying to educate my people. I'm not saying that pejoratively, or I'm not saying that sarcastically or anything. I'm definitely not the brightest bulb on the tree. I know that. So I'm not trying to say, I'm so much smarter, I'm going to educate you. But I'm just trying to show them what good critical thinking is, and what makes an argument an argument. And that comes from my legal background too. You can't just get up in front of a judge and spout your opinion. It just doesn't work out in the real world. But for some reason, out in the marketplace of ideas, when we're talking about things having to do important things, some of those important things, questions of values, morals, religion, our destiny, our origins, somehow our opinion seems to be enough. But so armed with the questions, but then also underneath, it goes actually back to your statement, Alan, I think was really a good one about knowledge. You know, there is a certain amount, I guess, knowledge that has to undergird this stuff. But yeah, so anyways, just opinions aren't proof. And we have to stop shouldering the burden of proof. Everybody who brings up an objection, like, they don't deserve an answer. I'm sorry. Like, not every objection is deserving of an answer, because not every objection is a real objection. It's just a statement. You know, there is no God. Okay, well, why do you believe that? You know, like, you know, and then let's talk about this.
Yeah.
You know, so really good chapter. I mean, it's nearly impossible to pull one thing out.
A couple of ideas. I don't know if this was in the book or if I just wrote this because it was my own thought.
Probably your original brilliant thought, Tim.
Well, he probably said
You're
something
so smart
along these lines. I wrote, everyone is an apologist for their view. Oftentimes, and this goes back to what we were talking about, you know, our knee-jerk responses, because we've almost been trained, you know, we're apologists. We defend the faith. So if someone says something we disagree with, start going into defensive mode. And so I keep in my mind, look, at everyone has a worldview, and everyone has to defend. If they want to hold that view rationally, they should be able to give reasons for their view. And so I try to keep that idea in my mind. Just one other thing I'll add is, and Greg says this on occasion, an alternative explanation is not a refutation.
That's good.
An alternative explanation is not a refutation. To me, that's money in the bank, because oftentimes, and Greg calls it a bedtime story, where people just try to tell you a story, right? And to kind of put your argument, your opinion, or whatever to bed. And so people put down those, they offer opinions, and what you need to respond with is say, that's a great alternative explanation, but what are your reasons? Because that doesn't refute anything I've said, right? You need to still hear the reasons. So that was helpful for me, but obviously everything you guys have said, great stuff. I want to bring up a couple questions here from the chat. David Carr says, Columbo presupposes that someone has asserted a claim.
Yeah.
It says, seems most young people don't care. Ambivalent. How do I initiate a meaningful dialogue? Okay, so they're not even making the claim. So any advice to this particular question?
Do you want to go first, Alan?
Well, I kind of said a lot before. I can, but
Okay.
you can go ahead if you want, John. Or
I'd say that they do care. You just need to make it more personal.
Yeah.
For them. The easiest example that comes to my mind is when you're talking to somebody about a moral law or a moral lawgiver. You know, they might pretend like they don't care. What's right for you is right for you. You do you, man. I'll do me. You do you. Well, once you encroach on their space pretty quickly, you know, let me see your phone, and just walk away. You know, and I think things they get to care real fast.
Yeah.
So I think these, I think that they do care. It's just a matter of figuring out a way to communicate these eternal truths, these big, holy cow, I call them big holy cow ideas. Where'd everything come from? Where's everything going? Who am I? You know, identity, meaning, purpose, destiny. They care. It just needs to be couched in a situation that points that out to them.
Yeah.
So my brother and I, so can I give an example? Is that okay?
I think that's allowed. Tim, would you say that's allowed?
Could you consult the rule book?
Sure. Let's allow it this time.
Let's take a pause. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Tim's going to consult the STR live rule book. I was talking to my brother once about the existence of objective moral standard. And my brother's a really good guy. He runs a nonprofit in Boston. He really has impact on inner city youth. Really, I mean, he's in many ways I look up to him. He's my older brother, non-believer, atheist. And he was arguing that the moral law is social. It comes from a social contract, right? So he's arguing social contract to me. And I say, well, I'm trying to talk to him about how we get to these things. So I say, hey, Dan, you know what? Like, we got to agree to disagree. We're just not getting anywhere. So let me just change the subject on you. And I learned this from JP Moreland, and it really got him. I said, Dan, I want to invite you in 2 weeks. A bunch of my guy friends, we're going to rent a cabin up at a lake, and we're going to have a really good time. We grill out every night. We stay up late. We just talk guy stuff. It's relaxing. It's fun. We go fishing. And my brother's vegan, and he's a huge environmental guy. So I say, but the best part of the weekend, Dan, is on Saturday, we drive into town, we buy a 50-gallon drum of sulfuric acid. And then what we do is we row out into the middle of the lake, and we all place a bet on how many fish we're going to kill when we dump the sulfuric acid into the lake. And the person who comes closest to the number of fish that die wins the entire pot of money. And my brother is like, dude, like freaking out, because I'm saying it like I'm going to do this. And like, this is my plan. And I'm like, dude, isn't this so great? And it's like, no, you cannot do that. Like, you cannot do that. That's not right. And I'm like, well, what do you mean, Dan? What do you mean it's not right? And it goes back to Columbo, and it re-engages the point here. What I'm saying is it re-engages my brother. I've given him a reason to care about the conversation, about the thing that I'm doing, talking about. And then I re-engage him through our Columbo question. So he got emotional, and which is in some cases good, to appeal to somebody's emotion, get them emotionally invested in the conversation, and then probe them for, well, okay, what do you mean that? Well, you just mean, Dan, you just mean that's not good because we have my social contract out in Southern California with my buddies. There's 100 of us. I think that's enough of us to get a social contract together. I think we can dump as much sulfuric acid in any lake that we want. And actually at this point, I remember him saying, he's like, well, he actually said, that's a good point, and it's a great example of a great conversation where we're able to leave kind of on equal ground, where I think I put a stone in his shoe.
Right.
So I don't know if that's helpful. Probably, I don't know.
So here's the, and I think this completely is in line with everything John just said. So David, who asked the question, what I would do, this is the question about apatheism in the church. Okay, there's probably the greatest threat right now is not atheism, it's apatheism, and it's in the church, it's outside the church. So how do we get young people to care? And John, I think, hit the nail on the head. You need to find something they do care about, because everybody cares about something. Now, the problem with the apathetic student in your youth group or wherever is that they don't seem to care about God questions. At least that's kind of the impression we get. But they do care about something. And so for John's example, it was this environmental thing. It was animals, and so he was able to get to the moral lawgiver. He was able to get to morality and the objective moral law, and that needs an objective moral lawgiver by going a certain route. And that's what you got to find. You got to find that route and then create doubt in their thinking, in their worldview. Doubt is actually a tool that we can use. We use it all the time when we go into a youth group and we beat kids up. We role play an atheist and we just take these kids out, take them up by the knees, essentially. And we show them, we motivate them. That's the problem, right? They're apathetic. We motivate them. We get them to care, because all of a sudden they realize they don't know what they thought they knew, right? And typically we'll role play the atheist, and if they don't know that we're Christians, man, it has a huge impact on these kids. So that would be, so what John's saying is find the thing that they are interested in, what they do care about, make the connection to the God question, which is what John did, a moral lawgiver, that kind of thing, and then show that there's an inconsistency in their worldview and the Christian worldview. And when you can highlight that, create some doubt, some tension, you can't live in doubt very long. You just can't. And Christians can't. And that's why you have these deconstruction things, because they never found answers, and they end up, and the atheists, likewise, when they doubt their skepticism or their atheism, that's when you can knock them off that, stability and maybe even into Christianity, that kind of thing. So that would be kind of a summary, I think, of what John's just described. Anything to add, Alan?
No, that's good. I'm sympathetic to what he's saying, because I think ambivalence is one of the hardest things to deal with. When people just at least appear to not care, it's probably one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing, to kind of undo. But your examples are really good.
Yeah.
And your points are really good at what you said. So.
Sweet. So how about let's just knock out this last chapter, and then if we have some time, I'm seeing some questions that are kind of maybe a little off topic, but I still want to hit them if we can.
Yeah, sure.
So let's go to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is called 2 Reliable Rescues, and deals with 2 concepts. And maybe we'll just go to you, Alan. What was a big takeaway? And then we'll go to John. And if there's anything left, I'll say something.
Yeah, I think the page 90, where he's talking about getting out of the hot seat, this whole concept, I think, is worth highlighting, in my opinion, for a number of reasons, besides the fact that it'll just get you out of the hot seat. But what he advises is, if you run across a situation where someone's raised an objection, or maybe you've asked, well, how did you come to that conclusion? And let's just say, they give you an answer, right? They give you evidence and reason. They take their roof and they turn it into a house by providing walls, right? And then at that point, you're like, I have no idea how to respond to this objection. Like, they've made an objection, they've offered their view, they've given evidence for it, and you don't know how to deal with it. Well, what Greg suggests is you acknowledge their point. You say, hey, you know what? That's a great point. That's a great argument. I've never heard of that, or I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with it. He says, can I get back to you on that? And so what you do is you acknowledge their point. You ask if you can get back to them, say, at a later date, if you're going to see them again. Perhaps they're a classmate. Perhaps they're a coworker. Perhaps they're a friend or a family member you'll see at another get-together. But what you do is you go home, you then do the research, you do the investigation, you go to str.org or look at J. Warner Wallace's website, or do whatever research you need to do to figure out the answer or the response or whatever it might be, to do your own investigation. And then when you see them again next week, next day, next class time, whatever, you say, hey, I was thinking about that argument you presented a few days ago, and here's my response. Okay. Now, that's great. I think that's super helpful. And I do that, by the way, because there's a whole bunch of arguments I've never heard of and don't know how to respond on the spot. And I do that all the time. But one of the big takeaways that I think Greg mentioned this just briefly, but I want to kind of make it more explicit, is that if you do that every time you come across a point or an objection that you don't know how to handle, and you do your research and you investigate and you learn the answer and you come back, if you do that every single time, you will give yourself an education. Right. You will learn so much in just 1 year, because you'll have studied all of these objections, and you'll have this amazing amount of knowledge on how to address objections. And what you'll find is that as you go through life, people who raise objections against Christianity oftentimes raise the same objections, no matter who you're running across. I mean, it won't be always the same, but the same objection will be raised multiple times by multiple people. And pretty soon, one day, you'll come across a person, they'll raise an objection, and you'll go, oh, wait a minute, I've heard that before, and I've done the research, and I know how to answer it, and here's my response. And you'll be able to give that response right there at that moment. And you'll be more like Greg, where Greg says, oh, yeah, here's the obvious reason why this is mistaken in your mind, and you'll be able to provide a response. So I think that approach of getting out of the hot seat not only will help solve the problem in the immediate sense, but it'll give you such an amazing education if you consistently do that for year after year after year. You'll walk away having a command of so many different areas and so many different things. It'll help you in the future like crazy.
Yeah, I was watching something, Rabbi Zacharias, one of his lectures, and
who?
Ravi Zacharias.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, I bet. And he made the comment because someone said, "Man, you seem to have all the answers." And he said, "Well, there's only about 20 or so questions that come up over and over and over again. So if every week you're at a different university and the same students asking about the problem of evil, or the same students asking about X, Y, or Z, you
Right.
begin to develop your response, right? And it almost becomes because you've done your homework on this." And so there's, and of course, in the work that we do, we hear a lot of the same questions. There's very rarely when you get kind of, hit with something that you haven't heard before. Okay. So John, do you have anything to add?
I was going to say everything Alan said so much better than I ever could. So thanks, Yoda.
Yeah. So the magic, I was going to say the same thing. The professor's ploy to me, that's, I guess in a specific situation, that's going to be a good tactic to have in your back pocket. But the one that I use all the time is, and encourage others to use, is the magic words, as Greg calls them. Now let me think about it. As long as you have those, you get in over your head. Now let me think about it. Yeah. There you go. And that's what you're going to do, by the way. You're going to think about it. It's not just your parachute to get out of the conversation, pull and get out of there. No, it's something you're actually going to do, like Alan said, and then develop a response, an apologetic. Let's spend just we'll probably close at the top of the hour. Let's just go through a couple of questions here.
I like Ron Woodruff's comment. I don't know if you bring that comment question.
Yeah, great comment. We found it helpful to preface the Columbo questions by saying something like, "That's a good question," or "That's really interesting," or "I can see you've really put some thought into this. Otherwise, it can sound hard and not sound snarky." Your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's amazing and the right thing to say and to do. And this goes back to the very beginning of the book Tactics, and something that we've mentioned already on the show, which is the idea that we are all ambassadors for Christ. And so we represent Jesus in everything that we do and say and how we come across to other people. Yeah. And those little things, which now are gone, but those statements, that's really interesting, or that's a good question, or that's a good point, or whatever. Like, those are the kinds of things that add a winsome and graciousness in the manner in which you're communicating with another person. And especially if you're at a point of disagreement, anything you can do to add an air of kindness and warmth and congeniality in the conversation will go a long ways towards creating an atmosphere that is conducive to having a friendly dialogue that includes some disagreement. Yeah. And I think those kinds of statements are what helps to add the conversational character that are so essential to being a good ambassador. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, and I think you're right, and you should do it. I think we all should do it.
Yeah, this is, I think Paul models it and he commands it in Colossians 4:5-6, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of your time, right? And then it says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. And so that's what I think what he's talking about. But he models it in Acts 17, where he comes to these, pagan idol worshipers in Athens, and he says, I can see that you guys are very religious. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can almost see that he's paying them a compliment and he's going to correct them, right? But he starts with this really, heartfelt, you can see you guys are religious, but it's not the right, you don't got the right God, right? So great point from Ron. How about, so Viv says, do you guys believe in miracles? Has God given you any? Do you believe in miracles?
Yeah,
I do.
The very fact that I believe in Jesus Christ and he was raised from the dead is a miracle.
Yeah.
My stone heart turned to heart flesh is a miracle.
Yeah, John, you actually did didn't you just recently do a live on your journey from atheism to Christianity?
Tomorrow night.
Oh, it's tomorrow night. Oh, okay. You were advertising it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you should probably watch that, Viv.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, today, Easter being Easter, that is a miracle as well.
Yeah, and of course probably all of us use the evidence for the resurrection, right, to make a case for Christianity.
Yeah.
But she may be thinking of other miracles as well, and of course, this is the kind of thing that I believe they still happen today. God's still working.
Yeah, and I think she may have been asking if we've experienced miracles of like
besides that kind of conversion, saving us.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Okay, another one.
Someone's Eddie is watching from Costa Rica. Sweet. Hey, Eddie. That's great. Going down here.
Jurassic World and Jurassic Park was Costa Rica, I think, wasn't it?
Was it?
Neither here nor there. All right, go back.
Yeah. Dennis said, creation. That was a pretty good miracle. You better believe it. Of course.
Pretty good, yeah.
We talk about that all the time. Okay. Actually, Margaret makes a good point that even because I guess there was a discussion in the chat about miracles, and that did lead people to follow Christ. It also, didn't. Think about Lazarus being raised from the dead, and what did the high priest and the Pharisees do? They hardened their hearts and they said, okay, now we got to kill Jesus and Lazarus, right? We got to take out the evidence. Greg Koukl calls this unbelievable unbelief. And it's the same. We see this today, by the way.
Yeah.
I play a clip in one of my talks where Richard Dawkins is talking with Peter Boghossian, both atheists. And Boghossian asked Dawkins, what would it take for you to believe in God? And Dawkins says, I used to say, if I heard a booming voice, I am God, believe in me. Or the second coming, that's what he said. But he says, you know what? Now, if those things happen, I wouldn't run to God. I'd run to a psychiatrist. And so then Peter Boghossian says, well, then what would convince you? And he said, well, I used to pay lip service as a scientist to follow the evidence where it leads. But he said, nothing would. That's a quote. Nothing would convince me.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable unbelief right there.
Yeah.
Makes me sad.
A little heart for Ravi. Yeah, we love Ravi. John was joking. We love Ravi.
Yeah, we all know who Ravi is. We're just
Holly says, don't be afraid to fail. I've learned from most of my failures. Yeah.
That's really good advice.
Narrating the debate. Was that in one of the chapters? Narrating the debate?
Yes, it is.
It's right at the end of the 6.
Chapter 6. And that actually is a very helpful tactic. Good for pointing that out. And that is simply just, here's what's going on. Because oftentimes people miss in the heat of the conversation, they kind of miss what's going on. So sometimes take a step back and describe, I said this, and notice your response,
Right.
Either avoided the question or it was incoherent or self-contradictory or whatever. So narrating the discussion, the debate can be very helpful.
I think one of the reasons why William Lane Craig is so effective at debating, and I don't mean to say that this is just a skill that you'd use only in a formal debate, but in any conversation. But one of the reasons why William Lane Craig, I think, is so effective and so many people are like amazed by what he says is because he's so good at narrating the debate. Like, he'll be debating an atheist. He'll say, okay, here are my 5 reasons for God's existence. Then the atheists will give their introductory speech. And then when William Lane Craig comes back for his sort of rebuttal, he'll say, okay, now notice what's happened. I gave 5 arguments for God's existence. He ignored, 3 of them. Okay. So if nothing else is said, like those 3 arguments stand and my points still are valid. But let's look at the 2 comments he made regarding these 2 points, Yeah. And then he'll respond to those objections. So then he'll say, okay, so notice what's happened now. He hasn't responded to my first 3 arguments, and the last 2 I've responded to his objections. So we are now left with the position that my view still would, carry the day or win the debate, if you will, And Bill Craig's so good at that, at narrating what's happening during the discussion, that people are kind of like, oh yeah, I can see that now. And it's sort of another reminder of the case he's made and how effective it is.
Yeah.
Nice.
Guys, I got to get going. I got to go to dinner.
Okay, let's wrap it up. You know, there's
a lot of good comments.
There's some good comments. I wish we could get to all these. Someone, Viv mentions Lee Strobel's Case for Miracles.
Oh yeah.
And I just listened to the audiobook. Lee Strobel reads it. It maybe is one of the best audiobooks that I've ever listened to. When
Keener's double volume set on miracles is like, you've got to get it.
Just countless miracle after
Which
miracle.
one, John?
Miracle.
Greg Keener.
Oh yeah, Craig Keener's. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, and then maybe it's the final thing we'll leave it on. Greg says that for the next installment of STR Book Club, I think Alan should shave his head.
I know, so I could fit in to be,
I agree.
I feel left out.
I just want to know what product you got to put in that beautiful mop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just took
Okay.
Guys, happy Easter.
Well, I want to be sensitive. I know we didn't get to everything. I see some other really good comments here. Sorry we didn't get to all this. Apparently these guys want to eat.
Yeah, I think my wife's actually in the chat room. She's telling me I'm going to be late for dinner if we keep talking. So.
Well, thanks guys for doing this, man. We always say half an hour, 45 minutes, and then it goes to well over an hour. So it was fun. I always learn from you guys. I really appreciate hanging.
Yeah, it's good to hang with you guys.
Thanks, guys. Happy Easter, man.
Yeah, you too.
Praise the Lord.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed. You guys are awesome.
We will so next Sunday, same time. And we're going to be looking at chapters 7, 8, and 9. So for those of you following along, make sure you read those. We'll have plenty of good discussion. And it's going to be fun.
I was going to say, and then so John, you're doing your next Facebook Live on Monday, you said? Oh, is he muted?
He just muted himself.
Are you muted, John? We can't hear you. Okay, well, it's Monday. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Monday
so Monday he'll be doing a Facebook Live. I'm doing one on Wednesday at 1:00 Pacific time on hermeneutics, the art and science of biblical interpretation. Tim, when's your next one?
I have no clue.
Oh, you don't have a sorry. Okay, yeah. Well, next Sunday for sure, right? With us.
Yeah. Yeah, but I know I'm gonna jump on and do something probably this week.
Okay.
Cool.
Anyways, yeah.
Bye,
all
guys.
right. We lost John's audio, so we're gonna lose his video. So